Bills Mafia, what's going on? Welcome into your Tuesday, October 8th edition of First and Five. I'm your host, DM3, also known as Dave Myers. You can follow me on X at Dave Myers BIB. Alongside me is NFL writer for Sport News Jarrett Bailey, longtime friend. We've been trying to get on a show together for quite a while. Jarrett, how you doing on this lovely Tuesday morning?
I'm doing good, man.
Afternoon,
Doing
sorry.
good. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. I'm just getting through the week, gearing up for, what's to come Thursday and prepping for week 6. So, yeah, just another day in the life.
So we were going to talk heavily about Joe Brady, but I think all the news that's come across this morning about what the dumpster fire of a team in New Jersey, the New York Jets, are doing with their franchise, I think we need to spend some time on that. We're going to talk about Robert Saleh. We're going to talk about the Devontae Adams. Is that trade going to be heating up here pretty soon? We're going to talk about Joe Brady in the offense, and we're also going to take a look at the Week 6 landscape for the AFC, with Jared being an avid Steelers fan. Definitely want to touch on that. So, Jarrett, first and foremost, as you saw the news that the New York Jets fired Robert Saleh, what was your initial thoughts? And then we'll kind of break this thing down a little bit more. What was your initial thoughts when you saw the news come across?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised, but I didn't necessarily think it was never going to happen. I mean, if the season kept going the way it's been going for the Jets, then yeah, a parting of ways felt like it was coming. But this feels like something very much coming from, an angry quarterback that seems to always find a way to lay blame elsewhere other than at his own feet. We saw Eric Mangini talking on FS1 saying, well, Woody Johnson was going to be pretty pissed if they lost in London because of, he's got tons of friends there as an ambassador to the UK or whatever the hell he is. So a lot of that stuff boiled in, combined with the fact that Woody Johnson's just a bad owner. The Jets are a poorly run organization. I don't think it should have surprised me as much as it did, but even then, you're a Jets team that, we talked about it in the lobby. I mean, if you win Monday, you're in first place in the AFC East. So now Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, takes over as interim head coach. And the way, all the stuff coming out about it is like they had security escort him out. He wasn't like warned about this whatsoever. He just showed up for, a Tuesday day of work. And they're like, by the way, you're relieved of your duties. It's a poorly run operation with the Jets. And I think that coming into the year, I knew it as soon as I did it. I said, you know what, I'll predict them to be a playoff team. And it was either going to go one of two ways. Either, okay, they were going to figure this thing out and everything was going to go somewhat smoothly. They can win 10, 11 games and be a wild card team. Or everything was going to hit the fan early on. And by week 8, Aaron Rodgers is going to be on Rogan talking about how much he hates the organization and how the government puts listening devices inside of cashews or, whatever his latest conspiracy theory is. So, and for as much as I joke about Aaron Rodgers, I like Aaron Rodgers. I do. But man alive, it is very easy to point at him and just understand the fact that he's, there's a big ego there, and a lot of that wasn't going to gel with Robert Saleh, and we're seeing how that has played out in New York. So we'll see. I was surprised about it, but in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have been.
I don't know. I'm like you. I think I feel like it was coming, and I feel like if the Jets missed the playoffs, I feel like it was just kind of inevitable. I do think that Joe Douglas is on his last leg. I don't know what else he's going to be able to do to save his job. Um, Barring a miracle, he makes a bunch of trades here, whatever. I think this was inevitable. For when it happened is very odd. Woody Johnson's never fired a head coach in season in 25 years. He's never fired a head coach, preparing for a game, in 6 days. I don't understand. And I think that where there's smoke, there's fire. I've always been a firm believer of, the whispers have gotten out about Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh's relationship. There's no denying that. Is Aaron Rodgers, playing GM? Is he, undermining what Joe Douglas is doing, trying to bring all these guys in, all the former Packers and all these guys in, Nathaniel Hackett calling plays, which he's probably one of the worst offensive coordinators in the NFL. Because I was also watching some stuff online, and they were talking about, well, if this was an Aaron Rodgers motivated move, why wasn't Nathaniel Hackett named offensive coordinator? Because that would be too obvious then, right? So you're going to go with the defensive coordinator who is a fiery guy, similar to how Robert Saleh used to be. To me, it's just odd because like we talked about in the lobby and like what you mentioned, if they beat the Bills, they're in first place. Granted, they're 3-3, but they're still in first place. They have a win over an AFC East opponent. And they can start, trying to figure some other stuff out. I feel like what Aaron Rodgers is doing on the field, I feel like is some rust. Now, is he four-time MVP Aaron Rodgers? Absolutely not. He's not. He's just not that guy anymore. Did he play bad on Sunday against a really good Vikings team? Yes, he did. But there was some questionable play calling as well on the offensive side. And if you look at Robert Saleh, his strength has always been defense. He was a great defensive coordinator with the 49ers. The defense with the Jets has always been really, really good. It's always talked about as being in top 5, top 3. The defense has not been the problem this year. It's been the offense and Aaron Rodgers. They haven't been able to sustain drives. They haven't been able to put up points. You put up 9 points against the Denver Broncos, the team that you should have easily beat. Now, I understand it was rainy and the weather was there, but I mean, I don't know what else Robert Saleh could have done. The only thing that I've seen over the past maybe season and a half, now, yes, there's the 20-36 record, but the only thing I've seen, he seems very like demoralized on the sideline. Like he doesn't seem like he's that fiery guy. We saw his reaction when they beat the Bills a couple seasons ago. Like he was like, holy shit, we climbed the mountaintop and we pushed forward. Lately here, the last season and a half, he just looks like a guy who's just defeated. I don't know if that's bleeding into the locker room. I don't know if the Aaron Rodgers effect is totally taken over his mantra on how he wants to coach his players. But a lot of defensive players the last couple weeks have been interviewed, and they were fully behind Robert Saleh, and they were fully supporting it. And I've heard they've been shocked about this. Is there been anything else that you've seen or heard? And then we can kind of put a bow on this, and we can kind of move on to the Davante Adams talk. But is there anything else that you might want to touch on that you kind of feel like this is an off time, or things that you've heard in the NFL Network that makes this just an odd move for the Jets?
Yeah, no, you brought up the body language. I was talking to my buddy Matt Verderin from Sports Illustrated yesterday on my pod. Go listen to the Pump Fake, by the way, everybody. And he was like, yeah, like he's just always like, they cut to him on the sideline. He's just got his hands on his knees and just looks utterly defeated. And oddly enough, last night Verderin was like, is he going to resign? Like just midseason to say, I'm done. Because it just looks like the life's been sucked out of him. And, coaching a bad football team for as long as he has will do that to you. So it's probably better for Robert Saleh's mental health at this point to not be coaching the Jets. But I don't feel bad for the Jets. They knew what they were getting into when they acquired Rodgers. They knew that this is going to be a roller coaster ride, and all the baggage that comes with him. So we'll see if Jeff Ulbrich can get a hold on things and maybe steer the ship back in the right direction. But this is very much a ship that's not being captained by any sort of coach. It's being captained by a quarterback and a crew that might have some resistant members. We'll see. But the fact that they're firing their head coach at the beginning of October, not great. Does
this not scream to you this is like a very Jets thing to do? Like, yeah. They can't get out of their own way. I feel like you have Aaron Rodgers, and I understand he got injured 4 plays into the season last year. I get it. You can't. There's no way you can look at that and say, okay, what's the next plan of attack in case Aaron Rodgers gets injured on the first drive of the season. But this just feels like something that's a very Jetsy type thing where they can't get out of their own way. Now I want to talk about Davante Adams for a minute here, because I think these two are kind of directly, intertwined with what happened with Robert Saleh and Davante Adams. Obviously, we know his relationship with Aaron Rodgers. Is this something where you think that Joe Douglas is on the phone right now with Davante Adams saying, look, I understand we just fired Robert Saleh. We still have Aaron Rodgers. We still have a really good defense. Or is this something where you think that Davante Adams doesn't want anything to do with the Jets organization? What's your initial take?
I mean, I think that playing with Aaron Rodgers will still be alluring to him. But if you're the Raiders now, I mean, the Jets are going to be desperate. If Joe Douglas calls you, you're like, all right, well, yeah, we'll give him to you, but you're giving us a first-round pick now. You want him that bad? You want to save the season? Give us a 1. And no, there's going to have to be some back and forth there. I'm sure Joe Douglas will be like, okay, if we give you a 1, you've got to eat a lot of that salary cap hit this year because we're not going to do that. So I think there's going to be some mutual like finding of middle ground here just because there will have to be. But yeah, if I'm the Raiders, I'm saying, all right, yeah, you want Devontae that bad? Give us a 1. Do it. And maybe the Jets are desperate enough to do that. Maybe Joe Douglas is desperate enough to do that to try to save his job. And you might as well, right? Because if it works out, great, then you're still the general manager of the Jets. And if it doesn't, well, you're probably going to get fired anyway. So you may as well, just throw all your chips on the table and try something. So, yeah, if I'm the Raiders and the Jets call me, I'm kicking my feet up and I'm demanding a little bit more than just a second-round pick in return for Devontae. Even if he is, in his early 30s, hey, he's still incredibly productive and still very good. So, see if you can weasel something out of it. And if you can't, okay, then you get a second. You still have to eat a little bit of that salary more than likely if you get a second. But if you can get as much draft capital as possible for him, especially from the Jets, because that's the team that's going to be the most desperate to do it, then you try to do it.
Yeah, and looking at that last interception by Aaron Rodgers, that was a very, I dare say, like, throw that he would make to Davante Adams. Like, contested catch, like Davante Adams is going to go get that ball. All right, so let's talk just solely. Let's stop talking about the Jets. I don't want to talk about the Jets anymore. Let's solely talk about Davante Adams. Where do you think is the perfect fit for Davante Adams? That doesn't mean where you think he's going to actually go, but where do you think the actual perfect fit for his skill set, right quarterback play, offensive style, and all that stuff? Obviously, trade packages and things like that. Where do you think is the perfect fit for Davante Adams?
I mean, if I'm him, I'd want to play in Washington right now. Jaden Daniels looks awesome. And outside of Terry McLaurin, like they don't have anybody. So if I'm Washington, I'm calling them like, we will give you a 2nd-round pick and a 5th-round pick and maybe like a conditional 4th thrown in there too. If we like go to the Super Bowl, then you'll get an additional pick. But Terry McLaurin, Davante Adams with Jaden Daniels, yes, sign me up if I'm the Commanders. I'm sure that Adam Peters is at least thinking about it. He's a smart guy who came from San Francisco who's going to know, like, okay, if we can go and get a guy like that. They were in on Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, that didn't pan out. So, and they traded away Jahan Dotson, who hasn't really done anything since he went to Philadelphia. So, they've got Terry McLaurin, Diami Brown, Luke McCaffrey. Like, Terry McLaurin's doing a lot of heavy lifting with that receiving core, and Jaden Daniels is still playing incredibly well. He threw a deep touchdown pass to Diami Brown against Cleveland. So, yeah, if I'm Davante Adams and I'm skewing through the list of NFL teams, I mean I'm circling Washington as one of those teams. Buffalo, obviously, because you get to play with Josh Allen and everything like that. You go to a team that's a contender and you make them instantly better. Bills would have to do some cap stuff to make it work, but they can make it work. So, I mean, those two make sense. I mean, the Steelers have been reported that they're going to make an aggressive offer and that maybe they already have made an aggressive offer. But if it's between those 3 teams, I mean, I'm putting Washington and Buffalo above Pittsburgh just because of the quarterback play. So those would be the 3 that would stick out to me. And Washington, I think, is one that's not getting talked about a lot, but it will make so much sense. And I would love to watch Jaden Daniels throw the ball to Davante Adams and Terry McLaurin for the rest of the year. That would be quite exciting.
Yeah, Davante Adams, it's a tough thing for me to talk about because I don't feel like the Bills general manager Brandon Beane is that guy that's like, okay, we need to fix this position right now. We just have to go all in. I'm going to get rid of this 2nd-round pick I got from the Vikings. We're going to try to see if they'll eat some of the cap and maybe we'll throw in something in 26 or whatever. He's just not that guy. The big splash trade that he's made was the Stephon Diggs trade because the Bills absolutely needed a receiver, and that we're talking 5 years ago. So I just don't know if that's a guy with that contract, if the Bills have the ammunition, like you said, to go and get Davante Adams. And I don't know. I'm struggling with if Brandon Beane wants to give up on this whole everybody eats mantra, even though we'll get into it here shortly with the 2-game lackluster performance, to say the least, by the Bills offense. I just don't know if Davante Adams is a guy that the Bills want to go get. Yes, we just got rid of a Stephon Diggs who's on the other side of 30 and has played more football than he has in front of him. And you could say the same thing about Davante Adams. But if you're trying to use what you have in this 7th year of Josh Allen, personally, I think it's a trade that needs to happen. I don't like watching Mac Hollins run deep routes. And again, I don't want to break away too much from this because we're gonna touch on the Bills' offensive play calling and how the guys are being utilized. But if it's not Davante Adams, for me, why not Amari Cooper? Amari Cooper is a guy who has got a cap hit this year that's less than Keon Coleman. Amari Cooper is playing with one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, and Deshaun Watson. There was a stat that I saw earlier going around that 45% of his passes are off target. I mean, you can't have success as a wide receiver if 45% of your passes are off target, and you just can't make those adjustments on the ball. What's your thoughts on Amari Cooper? I do feel like the Cleveland Browns are going to be in sell mode when it comes to the trade deadline. Their season is going absolutely nowhere. Deshaun Watson looks like he's regressed even worse than he did when he came back. The Browns are not going to bench him for whatever reason. What's your thoughts on Amari Cooper if he would be a fit with the Bills, and if you think that he might be on the move somewhere else?
Well, let me touch on the Brandon Beane stuff real quick because, just to be devil's advocate a little bit, I think that he would make a move like this because, we've seen him be aggressive in the past. They traded up to get Josh Allen. And Beane talked about it at the combine this past year because he was asked about, trading up for quarterbacks and the risk of it. And he kind of just said the same thing I did. He's like, well, if it works out, then great. I got a franchise quarterback. If it doesn't, I'm not going to be back anyway. So might as well go all in and hope to get a guy. And luckily it worked out and they got Josh. Right. The Stephon Diggs trade, they, went out and got Von Miller a couple years ago because they knew they needed, an edge rusher. The whole receiver by committee thing, that's just a fun way of saying, all right, these guys aren't very good, so we just don't want to come out and say that. So I do think that Beane would be aggressive enough to go out and trade the two that they have from Minnesota. Again, the Raiders are going to have to eat some of that money just because it is an expensive deal. But yeah, I mean, if you're Buffalo, take advantage of whatever window that you have. I mean, look, as long as Josh Allen's there, the window is going to be open. But how open it's going to be determined by who's all around him. And right now, they have zero greatness around him on offense, outside of maybe James Cook, who is very good. I think that the last 2 weeks were pretty eye-opening from different standpoints, both from play calling and receiver-wise, especially against Houston, where there's just nobody getting any sort of separation. And it's a lose-lose for Josh, too, because if he forces the ball too much and it gets intercepted, and that's all Josh Allen just turns the ball over too much, nobody's open. So I do think that he would make a Devontae Adams trade. In terms of Amari Cooper, that's one that makes a lot of sense, too, just because of the cost of Cooper. Yeah. They could do that much easier in terms of making the money work. And yeah, Amari Cooper, I mean, has been pretty outspoken on social media, about potentially leaving. I think he posted on his Instagram story or whatever after trade rumors started and said something like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind that. So yeah, Amari Cooper is going to get dealt. I think it's a matter of if or when, not if. And if Buffalo would want to do something like that, I think it would make all the sense in the world. We saw how much of an impact he had immediately in Dallas when he got traded from the Raiders. So I think it could be something very similar to that, where he comes in and is just instantly taking the offense up, taking them up a notch. So Cooper makes sense. Adams makes sense. If the money's the biggest issue, then Amari Cooper will be a fine consolation prize if they can't get Devontae Adams for that reason. But I would assume that Beane is working the phones very aggressively to try to get somebody, because I like Khalil Shakir, and I think he's a very strong receiver and everything. But if the offense goes to crap that quickly when he's not in the lineup, you got to get somebody, man. Got to get somebody. So I assume that they will be doing that sooner than later.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, a couple things before we continue on here. If you guys are just joining the stream, thank you for joining the stream. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. And like I always says, if you guys like the stream, you like the content that and the discussion we're having, if you like the content, you like the show, like the stream, please click like wherever you guys are watching that, so that we can get more interaction, more engagement, and try to figure out this YouTube algorithm, try to push that up. All right. So we talked about Robert Saleh. We talked about Devontae Adams. We talked about some other. Is there other guys potentially, and this is more of a Bills-centric question, is there more guys potentially you see out there as far as salary cap, as far as a good trade candidate, as far as how all the components would work, scheme-wise, player-wise? Is there another wide receiver out there you think that the Bills could look at, could potentially be available, and would be a good fit in Buffalo? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you want to look at somebody in Carolina, just because of the connections that are all there from Buffalo and Carolina and everything, maybe Deontay Johnson. I know he just got traded in March, but if he is angry and wants to go to a team that can win, maybe you call the Panthers about Deontay Johnson, maybe Adam Thielen. I think Adam Thielen's very much like a B, C tier guy. He's not the first one you're trying to get, but if you can't get anybody else, okay, it's better than nothing. Trade, a 2026 day 3 pick for Adam Thielen then. Cortland Sutton in Denver. I had a source tell me back ahead of the draft that both the Rams and the Steelers had called Denver about Courtland Sutton. Denver said no both times. They're 3-2 right now, but that's not a good football team that's going to sustain that throughout the rest of the year. And if they're, 4-6 by the deadline, 4-5, 3 and whatever, 3-6, I wouldn't be surprised if Sutton got moved. Even though they were very bullish on keeping him, he wanted more money this offseason. He didn't end up winning that power struggle, so he's still there. But yeah, I don't care what the Broncos record is. That's not a good team, and I don't see that being sustained throughout the year. If Jacksonville wants to move on from somebody, I mean, Brian Thomas has played incredibly well, so maybe Christian Kirk is a guy that you look at. Obviously, Josh and Christian Kirk are pretty tight, so that would be something that makes perfect sense in terms of just a personal relationship, a guy who's slot and boundary versatile. So there's plenty of guys that they could turn to if they can't get the big fish of Devontae Adams, or even if you want to throw Amari Cooper in there, that are going to be potentially available that they can go and try to get.
All right, I like it. All right, so we're going to talk about Joe Brady, and this is probably going to take up the last bulk of the show because I know that Jarrett has some strong opinions. Jarrett, he's always been a Buffalo Bills supporter. Obviously, he's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but he's always been a Josh Allen and Buffalo Bills supporter, and I know he watches the Bills and what the offense does. I have a few quotes, and we'll kind of digest everyone. I'll say it, and then we'll kind of both digest it together. This was from the press conferences from both head coach Sean McDermott and offensive coordinator Joe Brady that took place yesterday. Obviously, this coming 24 hours after the heartbreaking loss, in which the Bills had no business being in that game and losing with a field goal as time expired. The Texans did everything but basically just hand them a win on a platter with the turnovers in the second half and some other stuff that the referees actually made some favorable calls for the Bills. So this is from Joe Brady. Everything happens fast. You're going through all the scenarios. We had all the communication. We were lockstep in what we wanted to do. It didn't work out in our favor. I wish we had a different result. I'm not going to second guess. That was in regards to the final drive. So Jarrett, I'll ask you, as a fan of football, as a guy who covers the NFL and who's watched thousands and thousands and thousands of games, how do you feel the Bills handled the final, I think it was 32 seconds, from their own 3-yard line? Texans have 3 timeouts. The game is tied. How do you think they handle it? Maybe what would you have done differently, or would you have kind of stayed the course?
No, I mean, you're at your own 3-yard line. There's 30 seconds left. You haven't been able to do anything offensively all game. I'm not all of a sudden going to be like, maybe we'll be able to drive, 60 yards for a game-winning field goal. Run the ball, make Houston waste their timeouts. Even if Houston even does that, maybe they're just content going to overtime as well. But throwing it 3 consecutive plays, taking almost no time off the clock, and then giving the Texans the opportunity to just dump it underneath, get a few yards closer to kick, a 59-yard field goal to win it. I mean, it was just coaching malpractice. And I mean, that's nothing new with McDermott. Absolutely nothing new with McDermott. And that's been the Bills' biggest heel, is that in the biggest games against really good teams, like, they can't count on their head coach to be smart in those decisions. And whether it's the playoffs or whether it's big regular season games. They were very unprepared against Baltimore a couple weeks ago, where the Ravens showed them and said, we'll just run the ball all day. And the Bills were like, okay, we're going to sit in nickel and try to stop you and enjoy. And McDermott, like, credit to McDermott, because when he came to Buffalo in 2017, he very much helped change the culture and turn them into a perennial contender. Deserves all the credit in the world for that. That shouldn't give him a lifetime pass for bad coaching, bad decision-making in the biggest games. And that's not just the season against Houston or Baltimore. It's the 13 seconds game against Kansas City. It's the game against Cincinnati. It's every sort of shortcoming that they've had. It's last year against Kansas City in the playoffs when they weren't able to stop the Chiefs whatsoever defensively. And if not for a Mecole Hardman fumble at the goal line, the Chiefs probably score on 6 of their 7 actual drives that didn't end in, like, kneeling down or ending the game. So, like, I think that the biggest games and the best teams in the AFC during playoff time or in the biggest games look at the other sideline and say, we have the better coach in situational, big time situations. And that's not good if you're the Bills. Like, Josh Allen can be as great as he wants to be, and he is great. But he can only do so much when the guy under the headset continues to make bad choices and put them in bad situations. So it seemed like a very easy choice to make, to just run the ball At worst, the Texans waste all 3 of their timeouts and probably don't have enough time to kick a field goal. It goes to overtime. At best, they choose, okay, we'll just go to overtime. And then you got a chance to win a game that you had no business being in to begin with. So it just felt like coaching malpractice. And McDermott will always be like, yeah, that's on me. Well, dude, it's been 8 years, and the constant, yeah, that's on me, like that can only get you so far. So McDermott is, we've had these conversations really strongly over the past, dating back to last year when they were 500 after 10 weeks, firing Ken Dorsey. And then they rattle off that second half stretch and go to the playoffs, win the division. But even so, like, McDermott just chokes in the biggest games, in the biggest situations, whether it's playoff, regular season. And it's, as a guy who wants to see the Bills succeed, it's incredibly frustrating knowing that, if they face Kansas City in the playoffs, all right, I know Andy Reid's going to be prepared and smart and the biggest decisions. I can't say the same thing about McDermott. If they play, they played the Bengals a couple years ago in the playoffs, and they couldn't generate any sort of pressure against backup tackles for Cincinnati. Like, that's a problem, man. So there's a lot of things that are good with McDermott. He's not a horrible head coach by any means, but situationally, this thing has very much just felt like banging their head against a wall constantly because he just seems to be stubborn in his own ways and not willing to adjust and change, his like 3 biggest points going into a game, and just sticks to that no matter what. So it's frustrating to watch as a guy who wants the Bills to be successful, but knowing that the guy under the headset prevents them from doing that a lot of the time.
Man, that was a good spiel. I should have had you on tomorrow's show. Tomorrow's show, I'm talking about is McDermott on the hot seat. It's already scheduled, ready to roll.
And I hate to tell you, man, I don't think he is. I think that
I don't think he is either.
After Mike Tomlin, I think Sean McDermott's got the second highest job security in football. They are not getting rid of him.
And and I agree with you on that. I don't think he's on the hot seat. I just think it's a really good topic that everybody you're on.
I think he should be.
Yeah, and I feel like all of the Bills fan base is on one side or the other. They're like, who are you going to replace him with? And he should be fired. Yeah. Or he needs to stay, or he needs, like, it's not, nobody's like bringing up valid talking points, because here's what's going to happen. And we talked about this, when we were doing our pre-show discussion. Here's what's going to happen. It's what's happened in every season, 2020, 21, 22, and 23. They go through this lull where they just look out of sorts. They're not prepared. They're not being coached well. Players just look like they don't give a shit. And then what's going to happen? They're going to win 4 or 5 games in a row, and people are just going to say, see, we told you McDermott was going to figure it out. See, we told you that McDermott had a plan and it was just a lull. But you know what? They lost 2 games to 2 conference opponents. It's going to matter in the seedings late in the year. I'm sorry. But the Texans gave the Bills that game. All Sean McDermott had to do was say, hey, Joe Brady, I need you to run on first down so we can get a look at what they're going to do on second down. And then we can try to pass stuff underneath, easy completion, high percentage passes. Why are we throwing the ball 50 yards down the field to Mac Hollins? Like, it hasn't worked all game. It's not going to work all game. It's not going to work ever, but yet we're doing that. It's just, it's mind-blowing to me that you just don't run high percentage plays. Yes, like you said, they may stop you, but you know what? Maybe they use all their timeouts. Maybe they still have time left to get into punt range or to field goal range and do all that. Maybe they do. But at least put your team in a position to make the odds more difficult for the Texans. So again,
like the thing with the Bills offense, at least the past couple weeks, is, there's been a lot of comparisons to, their mindset going into the season to what the Chiefs was when they traded Tyreek Hill. The difference between that is, the Chiefs figured out very quickly, okay, we're just going to run a ton of heavy personnel. We're going to go 12, 13, have 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends on the field, like, all the time. Teams aren't going to know if it's going to be a run, pass, whatever. The Bills, and Matt Perino, who does tremendous work covering the Bills, talked about it yesterday. They've had Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid in the same building for a year and a half and have not figured out how to use 12 personnel whatsoever. So there's like no easy button. At least there hasn't been for the offense over the past 2 weeks. And if you look at Josh's passing charts from week 5 against Houston, like half of his throws are 15 yards or more downfield. Like, you don't have a legitimate deep threat on this team right now. Do some easy underneath completion stuff and just hammer that all game like you did the first 3 weeks. And then maybe something will open up downfield. But the fact that you're just Okay, Mac Hollins. Yep, that's who our offense is going to be driven through today. What are you doing, man? Like, drop some easy underneath stuff, drop some mesh concepts that almost always work. Get the ball to Curtis Samuel in easier ways that aren't bubble screens, because that seems to be all they utilize Curtis Samuel for. I know a lot of fans are banging on Curtis Samuel right now. I can't blame Curtis Samuel.
No,
They're not using him in any way other than, all right, we're going to put him in the backfield for a play, drop a bubble screen that'll gain a yard, and that's about it. So a lot of the things over the past 2 weeks with the offense, it looks like Joe Brady's gotten away from his philosophy, especially against Houston, where if you looked at the passing charts, you would have thought Ken Dorsey was calling the plays, because it was just nothing but downfield shots that weren't working. They got away from the run game that was working early on. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it didn't look like a Joe Brady coach team.
Yeah, a couple points that I'm gonna piggyback off a couple things you made, because I did want to bring up the Dawson Knox usage. He's your highest paid tight end. He's one of your highest paid players on offense, minus Curtis Samuel, which I'll talk about here in a second. He had no targets Sunday. He wasn't even in there when they were trying to throw bubble screens to block. He's your best blocking tight end. He's not even on the field. Dalton Kincaid gets blown up on every screen. Like, there's 3 plays on 2 separate drives, where there's 3 plays total where they tried to throw the screens and he just gets destroyed. We've known since he was drafted that Dalton Kincaid is a guy that's basically he's a pass catcher, and that's how Brandon Beane even phrased it when he was defending the pick, because everybody's like, wait, you just gave Knox this massive contract and you just drafted a tight end, regardless of if you thought he was going to be there in the first round or not. We were sold on the elite hands. Fine. Don't put him in those situations. And like you said, we were preached all off season about 12 personnel and how you have the perfect 2 guys to run 12 personnel. I don't know what they're seeing in practice throughout the week, that maybe they're not installing that package. Maybe they don't have confidence in those 2 guys, or the 2 wide receivers that you'd run with 12 personnel. But to me, you're using Curtis Samuel in a way that you didn't use him in Carolina, when he had one of his most, if not the most successful seasons of Curtis Samuel's career was with Joe Brady in Carolina. You didn't use him like you are right now. I looked up the passing chart from 2020 when he was in Carolina, and it was all over the place. The pie graph that they showed wasn't just bubble screens.
Right.
It was out of the slot. It was deep route. It was crossers. It was stuff out of the backfield, using him as a running back. Fine. I get that you don't want to line him up back there because you have James Cook and you got Ray Davis, but like, I don't understand. Your highest paid wide receiver is being used as a gadget step up from Isaiah McKenzie. Like, I don't understand the philosophy. I don't understand why they weren't at least using him like they did in the first 3 weeks. Put him in motion, at least cause some confusion. And then back to your point, you were talking about the Texans defense. What defense do the Texans run? They run a 1 high safety, and they're going to blitz at least 50% of the snaps. What did they do the first 5 weeks? That's what they did. What did they do against the Bills? They ran 1 high safety, and they blitzed 50%, if not more, of the snaps. So if Joe Brady doesn't look at the previous 5 games that the Texans played and realized, I don't have the personnel on the outside to beat their corners, because we just don't have the physical and athletic guys in, Keon Coleman, who's still learning the playbook, and Mac Hollins, we need to do something else. And he didn't do that. And that's a huge failure on Joe Brady, as far as I'm concerned. Because everybody wants to talk about the 9 for 30 Josh Allen. Okay, who did he miss some reads? I watched the L-22. He did miss some check down reads, and I understand. But if you look at a lot of the pressure situations when he just needed a guy to separate, if he was getting rolled out to the right, to the left, he was getting, pressured, whatever, nobody was there. Nobody was there at all. And that's what's the most infuriating thing about this whole thing, is that it just feels like for 3 weeks, the everyone eats mantra worked. And then for 2 weeks, the NFL figured it out and said, we're going to force you to use the outside. We're going to force you to try to throw deep because we're not giving you anything underneath. Do you feel that's the same kind of mantra? Because there's film on Joe Brady, and 31 other defensive coordinators now know, hey, like, if the Bills can't get anything underneath, they're stuck in the mud. I mean, is that how you feel? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, talking about the 9 for 30 stuff, like Allen missed 2 throws on, I think it was like their first drive. He missed Mac Hollins over the top. I know a lot of people put that on Mac. Like, it could have been a better thrown ball. We can call a spade there. The one to Kincaid, he had a step and it was just bulleted. It needed to have a little bit more air. After that, though, I mean, nobody really had too much separation. There was a pass that was caught by Kincaid on the sideline that shouldn't have been ruled incomplete that McDermott didn't challenge. Which, by the way, they hired a former ref whose name is escaping me right now, to be like a challenge consultant and be in McDermott's ear, be like, hey, you should probably challenge that. So glad to see that's being utilized really well. And look, I don't know if that would have won them the game if they could have extended that drive, but who knows? They could have.
But you were gonna punt anyway, so what does it matter?
Exactly.
And the way I look at it is long-term results. So you go into halftime with 3 timeouts. So you would have lost the timeout if you lost the challenge, right? So what does it matter? What does it matter?
It's just a lot of head scratching stuff with McDermott. We already talked about that, but in terms of Josh, like the receivers, like we know that what the receivers are. We knew that coming into the year. They were able to take advantage of that in the first 3 weeks against, a bad Cardinals defense, a Dolphins defense that isn't nearly as good as people thought it was going to be. I mean, everybody last year thought it was going to be great with Vic Fangio. Now with Anthony Weaver, it's, a little bit better, but like Jalen Ramsey at this point in his career doesn't really scare me. Josh Allen clearly isn't scared of him either because he, gets one over the top of his dome every game that they play against each other. So like, they're able to traditionally bully the Dolphins. You can beat up a bad Cardinals defense and a Jaguars defense that is just a bad matchup because they play a ton of man, and the Bills took advantage of that. Yeah. But when you play against the Ravens, who throw a bunch of different dynamic looks at you, Zach Orr called a really good game there. They weren't able to really run the ball all that well, and defensively it was bad. We already talked about that. They couldn't stop the run. So once you get behind that quickly, then you're really playing behind the 8 ball. Similar thing happened with Houston where D'Amico Ryans is going to throw a bunch of different stuff at you, and the Bills got behind and they felt like they had to throw their way back into it when really they didn't necessarily have to. Like, they could have just kept feeding James Cook, whether it was on runs or just kind of extension of the runs through the pass where it's, easy swing passes or, some Texas routes, some stuff like that. And they just got away from what their philosophy is over the last 2 weeks because they put themselves in a hole. So the entire thing against Houston was incredibly frustrating. How they still somehow had, a chance to win that game is crazy. The defense really played well in the second half. Dwayne Carter had a great game all around. So
yeah, he really did.
I think the Bills are still going to be largely fine. Like, I think there's 4 teams in the conference that would stun me if they don't make the playoffs. It's Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, and who's winning? Who's the other one that's escaping my mind right now? I named 3. Regardless,
the Texans.
The Texans, yes. Yeah. So I think those are going to be your 4 division winners, and the Bills are going to be in the mix when it comes to the playoffs. So now it's just about, okay, let's fix this stuff before the playoffs. That way we're not, it's week 16 and we're still having these, malfunctions and not being able to adjust if we're trailing. So hopefully they're able to do that. If they get things back on track against the Jets and they're 4-2, then they go into a stretch of games against Tennessee and Seattle. They should very easily be 6-2 after that. I mean, Seattle's defense is pretty good, so that might give them a little bit of a fit on the road. But at worst, okay, you're 5-3 after 8 games. You got a pretty decently easy stretch. But I think largely they're going to be fine with the last 2 weeks. And Josh even said this, I think, after the Baltimore game. It's good to get ass kickings out of the way early on. That way you can look at what you did wrong and adjust now rather than, okay, it's week 14 and we just got slaughtered. What are we doing wrong? So hopefully they can adjust quickly and, figure out a way to play from behind, not just, okay, we've got to stay to our script here. And if it doesn't work, then we're screwed.
Yeah, I mean, fun fact, the Bills have the easiest schedule. If you're looking at record-wise, the Bills' remaining opponents, they have the easiest schedule. I saw that come out from a couple different outlets this morning, which I thought was very interesting because the first 5 games, I think, was one of the toughest preseason. So let me ask you this question, and I'm not a sky is falling guy. I'm like one of those guys that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's an 18-week season. It's all this stuff can be corrected. And Sean McDermott, like we kind of alluded to earlier, has found a way seemingly every year to kind of right the ship and whatever that takes to get the Bills back into the playoffs, win the AFC East and whatnot. If the Bills lose on Monday, how concerned should the fan base be about the direction of this team going forward for the 2024 season?
I mean, like, yeah, it'll stink, but I still like my panic meter would be like a 4, just because they have an easy schedule and the rest of the AFC East is bad. Like, I'm still not going to believe that the Jets are going to win the division, even if they win that game, just because they're dysfunctional. The Dolphins don't have a quarterback, and the Patriots are a dumpster fire. So, like, even if they lose this game, I still think they're going to win the division. Um, Obviously, that's not the goal at this point if you're a Bills fan. Like, it's Super Bowl or bust. So, in that regard, then yeah, you're probably a little bit panicked. But even so, like, it's still October. We were sitting in this exact same spot last year when they were 5-5. They fired Ken Dorsey, and they had a daunting schedule in front of them. And then they went 5-1 the rest of the way and won the division. And very nearly, if not for a Tyler Bass missed field goal, maybe beat the Chiefs at home. So there's a lot of things that didn't go their way, and I think a lot of that luck has just been, exactly what it's just bad luck in a lot of ways. But even if they lose and go 3-3, like, I'm not sky is falling yet on the Bills. Now if they get blown out again, then yeah, maybe my panic meter will be a little bit higher. But this is still a team that I think is going to win the division, and has some things to clean up. Definitely, like, they need better play at safety. They need better play at linebacker. I know that Milan was hurt, and that's going to hurt them. But once they get him back, I think that'll pick up a lot of things in the front seven. Von Miller's not there right now because of the suspension. They've really had to lean a little bit more on AJ Epinesa and Russo during that time. So there's a lot of things defensively that are wrong too right now with the Bills. So even if they lose, like, yeah, it's going to be a media firestorm. Everyone's going to be like, the Bills stink and whatnot, but they're still going to be in the playoffs when the time comes, and it wouldn't shock me if they found a way to come out of the AFC. So it's not going to be, I'm not going to be ringing any alarms.
The only thing that concerns me about the Jets, first off, it's the house of horrors for the Bills. I don't know what happens when they go play there at MetLife when it's against the Jets. I don't know what happens to this team, but when they play in Buffalo, it's a completely different game. The old adage of, let's play for the new guy, since Robert Saleh got fired, and now they're going to be playing for the defensive coordinator. Do you feel like that is a thing? Do you think that it's just kind of, it just looks that way on paper because we don't pay attention to when the interim guys lose? What's your thoughts on that? And then we'll touch base on the AFC and we'll kind of wrap it up here in a second. But what's your thoughts? Is this I don't want to say a trap game, because I think these teams are more evenly matched than a lot of people think. This could be a game where Aaron Rodgers just finds, 4-time MVP Aaron Rodgers. But is this a game where you think this could be one of those, let's play for the new guy and show the owners that we mean business and stuff like that? Or do you think that this is what it should be? The Bills are favored by 3, should go in there and win. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the new coach, the interim coach bump is it seems like a real thing. The Panthers beat the Tom Brady Bucks with PJ Walker at quarterback a couple years ago after they fired. Was it Matt Rule that they fired and they brought in Steve Wilkes? So
yeah.
It's a real thing, I think. And that's something to be a little bit worried about. But at the same time, the Bills, if they stick to what they did in the first 3 weeks and are able to run the ball consistently and beat a better team, then everything's fine. But yeah, I will be wary of the whole, interim coach bump, because it does, especially in recent years, has been a real thing where, a new guy comes in, the team plays inspired, they feel like they let their guy down. Obviously, like the infamous Jeff Saturday game where they beat the Raiders. So like there's plenty of examples of like stuff like that happening. So I think the Bills will win this game. You said it was a 3-point spread right now. That's probably fair, just because the Jets have a really good defense, and offensively, they turn the ball over a lot against Minnesota, and I think a lot of that is just the chemistry isn't all there yet. It's still only game 5 of Rodgers, really, since becoming a Jet, and you're still figuring a lot of stuff out. This early portion of the season is kind of an extension of the preseason for a lot of these teams. So I think that starting right around now is when we start to see, the good teams really separate, the bad teams kind of separate in the other direction. And the Bills should be able to be one of those teams that separate in the positive direction.
All right, we're going to wrap it up we're going to talk about the AFC conference outlook, because you are a Steelers fan. Obviously you pay close attention to the Buffalo Bills and support the team. So not just this week, but how are you feeling right now with the Steelers being 3-2? heading into the stretch that they're heading into, and then we'll kind of, how do you feel about what the AFC looks like overall? Because Baltimore seemingly has turned their season completely around, starting with the ass whooping they gave the Bills. They got lucky to beat the Bengals in overtime with a missed field goal. But how do you feel overall with the Chiefs being 5-0, the Texans being 4-1? You guys are right there in the mix at 3-2 with the Bills. How do you feel about the AFC East shaping up right now, even though we're just heading into week 6? I think Jarrett froze on me. Yeah, we'll see if we can get Jarrett back. Oh, all right, Jarrett froze on me. Well, all right, so that's going to do it for this week's. It's going to do it for this Tuesday's edition of First and Five. I will be back here tomorrow, 3:00. We're going to talk about Sean McDermott and the Bills coaching staff. So I will see everybody there. Thank you guys all for joining me. For Jarrett, follow him. He does a lot of great work with the Sporting News, writes for the NFL. Obviously, he's a huge Josh Allen and Buffalo Bills supporter. So with that being that, I'll see you guys back here tomorrow on First and Five.